Hello, my name is Ayman Rajih, and you're watching the Arabic Hour.
But I know that there have been those certain Lebanese in the United States that have been remarking and presenting these protests as if they are anti-Hezbollah or even sometimes pro-Israeli protests. That is completely not the case. The sovereignty of this country rests on two things: our economic capabilities and our political awareness of who our enemy is. And we refuse to differentiate or divide between the two or choose between the two. We want an economy that is just and fair and equitable and that is built on our self-production in Lebanon. We want a country that is civil and secular and just in Lebanon. And we will always be fighting for the liberation of our lands and fighting to protect Lebanon from the Zionist state. We will not choose one fight for another.
Lebanon is our topic today. As you know, Lebanese people have taken to the streets since October 17th to protest against a political elite seen as corrupt and unable to manage the country's worsening economic situation. With us today, via Skype from Beirut, Lebanon, is Dr. Rania Masri to help shed light on the situation. Dr. Masri is representing her party, Mouwatinoun ومواطنات في دولة, loosely translated as citizens in a state. Rania, thank you very much for being on with us today. Let's start in the beginning. We're talking about Lebanon today and what's been happening for the last, 33 days so far.
Yes.
How did this protest or revolution start? What, in your opinion, was the spark that got this all going?
Yeah, well, it's a pleasure to be with you all again. Thank you for the invitation. I prefer to call this an uprising or an intifada or a protest rather than the very heavy term of revolution.
Okay.
We have been protesting in the streets every day for more than 1 month now in Lebanon, in most of the regions in Lebanon, from the north to the south, from Beirut to the central mountains, off and on, but every day there has been someone in the streets throughout the country. And the reason people are protesting is very simple. We're feeling a lot of economic pain, and we have lost all political trust in the sectarian leadership in this country. As for what was the particular spark, I think there were a number of small little sparks. Before the protest began on the 17th of October, we had several very large fires erupt throughout the country. And we know that October is actually a very high month of forest fires in Lebanon. The government responded with its typical level of incompetence and impotence. Even our civil defense wasn't properly equipped with basic food and water to maintain their own struggle against the fires. So people's anger against the government escalated as they literally saw their country burn. And then just when we were able to breathe again after the fire, one of our ministers declared quite intelligently that he wanted to impose a tax on WhatsApp. So it became known as the uprisings against the WhatsApp tax. But that was simply the spark. People did not go to the streets to protest an additional flat tax on our consumption, but rather to protest the very high levels of economic injustice and the very high levels of political distrust.
You know, I'm glad you brought up the fires, because it seems like we've forgotten about those since the uprising and people on the streets. Not to digress, but is there anything happening in regards to that? I know that the fires have been out for some time, and the areas that the fires occurred, is there anything in the works as to reforestation or anything like that?
No, actually the fires have not been out. The fires that began, that raged a little bit more than a month ago, those fires have been out, but every few days there's other fires that erupt in the country. And the main reason behind those fires is the accumulation of drought and forest litter because of climate change and bad forest management. And possibly there has been some kind of either accidental or deliberate fire, forest fire setting. But the responsibility with the fires, as with the economic situation, rests 100% on the government. The fires are no surprise. We know the months of high risk to our forests. They come as no surprise. The drought is no surprise. The accumulation of forest litter is no surprise. And unfortunately, the incompetence of the government has no longer been surprising. The same is the case with regards to our economic situation. We are right now at a financial bankruptcy. It is a bankruptcy that my party has been organizing against since the time that we were established. It is a bankruptcy that my party declared in a press conference more than a year ago, that we would be facing this financial bankruptcy. And the response from the political leadership in this country more than a year ago was to ignore our call. So here we are today, where we are truly facing a financial bankruptcy because of the very problematic trade deficit that we have been facing since 2008, but that has escalated this past year. This financial bankruptcy means people now can no longer import what they need. We're talking about hospital equipment, healthcare equipment, food for our cows and our goats so that we can get milk and cheese and so on and so forth. This isn't a simple financial difficulty. We are talking about a country facing bankruptcy worse than Argentina, worse than Greece, worse than most of the countries that you all in the United States have heard about.
Today, I understand that the banks they've been closed for, 2 weeks now?
They've been closed for 3 out of the 4 weeks thus far, yes.
And what was the reaction? Was there a run on the banks? What have you seen today?
Well, to my knowledge, the banks have not opened today. So I could be mistaken, but to my knowledge, the banks have remained closed because today was a very heated day in the country. The banks have decided unilaterally to close, by the way, not because they are afraid of the protesters. They claim that they're closed because they're afraid that we're going to topple them down. But we have very ample national security forces that know how to protect the banks. Rather, the banks have decided to close because there is no political leadership overseeing the distribution of funds that remain in the banks. So we know how banks operate. We know that when you put your money in the bank lends out more money than it actually has, on the assumption that people are not all going to demand their money at the same time. Correct. We now have people who need to get their dollars, whether to pay rent, whether to pay other needed material. We have people who need to access their funds so that they can import what their companies need. At the same time, these banks also have foreign debts that if they are not able to pay, then our assets could be seized by foreign governments. So we have a significant problem. The way the banks have chosen to deal with this is to remain closed, because just as we are protesting our lack of trust in the government, the banks have also shown that they have a lack of trust in the government, and that's why they're closed. They're waiting to get clear political leadership so that we don't have a stampede to remove all our funds, which the banks obviously no longer have anyway.
And when is this political leadership going to show up? I mean, I understand today also
present. I mean, there are men and women in this country who have the experience and the wisdom and the foresight and the expertise to lead this country out of the financial bankruptcy and into the political situation that is needed. The question is, when will the 5 or 6 political leaders in this country actually recognize that they can no longer lead? We have the Prime Minister, Saad al-Hariri, who submitted his resignation weeks ago. And until yet, no suitable Prime Minister has been chosen. There also have been no serious negotiations on the establishment of a new government. We do not simply want a government composed of the same men and women that have been robbing this country blind and proving themselves to be both incompetent and impotent. Rather, we want a government of statesmen, of real leaders, not ones beholden to their sectarian affiliations and not ones beholden to foreign interest. It is only when we get that government that we will stop protesting in the streets.
How do you expect to get that when, as you said, the 5 or 6 political leaders that have been around for 30, 40 years, actually generations, some of them, from the father to the son and so on, how do we expect them to all of a sudden change and say, you know what we've been doing for 40 years hasn't worked, let's try something else?
Very simply. So when we talk about a financial bankruptcy in the country, that means the country is running out of dollars. Okay. And much of our income depends on dollars, does not depend on Lebanese lira, which we can print out and which would mean nothing because we are a country of import. We import 90% of our needs. So that also means that these very same political leadership, these very same sectarian political leaders are also beholden to those dollars because they need those dollars to run their machines, their allegiances, their support within their political leadership. And they're also running out of those dollars. They also have contracts in the banks that they want to submit, and the banks are also closed for them. So they are facing a significant difficulty, and I'm talking about all of them. Now, whether they are facing the same difficulty that we, the people, are facing, that is open for question. But most definitely, they are facing a historic difficulty. Their options are they can continue to pretend that nothing is going on, continue to try to fool the Lebanese public by trying to bring up other issues such as this general amnesty law that they have been proposing, rather than deal with the financial crisis. And the more that they play with the time, the more that they extend this time, the worse the financial crisis will be. So for them, as it is for the rest of the country, it is only a matter of time until they realize that their level of incompetence truly means that they have to relinquish power. We hope that they will realize that sooner rather than later. Eventually, truly, they have no choice but to relinquish power to those who can actually lead the country forward. If they decide that they want to sell what remains of the country, which was what Saad al-Hariri proposed in his first speech when we took to the streets, when he proposed to privatize a significant portion of the Ministry of Telecommunications. And this is the main ministry within which the government gets revenues. Okay, our most profitable source of revenue for the state is our phone services, because they also are one of the most expensive phone services in the world. But when he seeks to privatize that he is depriving the state of the very means that it could have to rebuild itself and step out of the financial collapse. He was also proposing privatizing the airport or privatizing the port. So basically privatizing whatever brings the state funds. If they continue with that route, we will continue with our route of protest. Eventually, they will fail, and eventually, wise men and women will be able to take over. But the question of time becomes a crucial one for the survivability of this country and for the survivability of this society. And this is truly, and I'm not exaggerating, one of the most dangerous episodes Lebanon has ever witnessed since it was created in 1943.
That's what it seems like. And do you think they are waiting it out, trying to see who can hold on longer, be it the people on the streets or I as a sectarian political leader with maybe a little bit more resources than the man or woman on the street?
They are trying to do that, but perhaps what they have failed to realize is then when the wages are cut for the people in the streets, and our wages have been cut, the unemployment continues to increase. When our access to basic necessary material is no longer available, when we run out of fuel in the country to operate our generators and our electrical power plants, when the hospitals have already told us that they're running out of equipment, and when the hospitals finally close their doors to their patients because they no longer have the material to sustain our lives, what are these leaders expecting the people to do? To simply croak in their beds and be silent? Are they actually expecting that the protests will diminish at the same time that the financial collapse increases rather than the reverse? I personally do not think that they are that irrational. That, I cannot imagine a level of irrationality and stupidity and arrogance that would be that high that they would actually expect people to protest less when the situation gets worse.
Now, people are questioning the leadership of this movement. Who's leading it? Is there foreign interference? What are your thoughts on that?
There is no leadership for the movement. When we're dealing with an uprising from the south to the north, literally from Nabati to Trablus, from Beirut لعبادية, لبعلبك, للهرمل, لعكار, there is no leadership for the movement. This movement is extremely decentralized. What there is a unity in demands. And people throughout the country have been expressing in one way or another their frustration with the economic system and their frustration with the political leadership. As for foreign intervention, of course there's foreign intervention in the country. We would be fools to think foreign embassies wouldn't be involved in Lebanon, particularly given that they've been involved in Lebanon since 1943. It might actually be a personal offense if they've decided no longer to be involved. But the involvement of foreign embassies, the involvement of sectarian political parties themselves in the movement does not in any way relinquish the responsibility of the citizens of this country to protect what remains of our country. Rather, it increases our responsibility. We have to be wiser to their manipulations, and we have to be wiser in protecting our country. And this is what we are vehemently trying to do.
Now, I want to go back about 15 years now with the Cedar Revolution.
With the what revolution, I'm sorry?
With the Cedar Revolution.
Yeah, with the protest that encouraged the removal of the Syrian army.
Syrian army out of Lebanon. How do you see that and what is happening today?
Vastly different. Vastly different. The protests from 2005 were predominantly orchestrated by political parties. And we saw a split in the country between those that were supportive of the Syrian army in Lebanon and those that were opposing the Syrian army in Lebanon. What we have now, however, is protests that have arisen from the people, that certain political parties have tried to cower behind or tried to exploit. But there has been no political party leadership in the protest today, which is in stark contrast to the protest of 2005.
Now, one of the things that people outside Lebanon, and we get this, we see this all over the place, people saying, you guys as Lebanese know how to protest or revolt or uprise. People are, dancing, they're listening to music, enjoying each other's company, if you will. And some people are looking at that and going, well, how bad things are, and these people are out in the street kind of having a good time. And I know that's not the fact on the ground, but I think you can appreciate how people are seeing these scenes. Do you have any comment on that? I mean, you're
I remember back when I was living in the United States, and we had protests throughout the continent of the United States, and we were wearing flashy colors, and we were taking our pots and pans, and we were dancing in the streets and trying to be jubilant, and in no way were we minimizing the impact of what we were protesting against. So in some ways, when people bring music and dance to the protest, they are bringing that to keep their own spirits high amidst the horrors that they are facing and the fears that they are facing. It is not because they themselves have become facetious in their actions. In another way, yes, there are people who are participating because they have been reclaiming the spaces that have been denied to us. If you consider where we are protesting in Beirut, we are protesting in what was once considered El Balad, central downtown. It is an area that has been illegally privatized. I shouldn't say illegally, because Rafiq al-Hariri actually passed laws to privatize and commodify a part of the city that was known for all, to be inclusive for all. And he made it a very economically exclusive area. We are living in a country that has been deprived of public spaces, deprived of public spaces in the full sense of the word. So in many ways, when you see people in the United States, when you see us here dancing and singing in these spaces, that is also a form of protest to reclaim the very spaces that have been denied to us. And perhaps the music in the streets and the dancing in the streets has also served to assist in people staying longer in the streets. But accompanying those musics and accompanying those dances, and this is perhaps what is not getting the international attention that it needs, there have been tents set up throughout the country in which very serious political discussions are being held, where we are educating each other politically, where we are resurrecting the importance of political discussions, where we are talking about political options. We are talking about how we actually want to build a state. So while there are those that sing and dance, which I have no problem with, there are also a very large group of us that are conducting serious communications on pathways that we can use to build our country and to finally have a state in Lebanon that regards all its citizens as citizens and not as hostages to their sectarian affiliations.
Well, the other thing that we also see is people picking up the trash after each and every, and which is, to me personally, amazing. It's a great thing. I've been in Beirut and I see how things are and how they can be. But my question to you is, what do they do with all this trash and where is it going? I mean, I know we have a trash problem in Lebanon as a whole. What's being done with all this trash?
Well, I mean, there are attempts to sort as much as they can. There are at least attempts to pick up, and then they are deposited in the areas that are available in the country, either for sorting or for trash collection. But at the very least, the scene remains clean, and we are trying again to protect what remains of our country. Okay. Perhaps more importantly than the trash pickup is the way that we are now looking at the sectarian political leadership, where it's time for them to be recycled. They have served their time way past their time, and it is necessary now that we have competent, free, legitimate leaders that can take our country forward.
Now, one of the demands is early elections.
That's a demand by some, not by all, and that's a demand that we in our party do not share, by the way.
And why is that?
Well, when you call for early elections in the midst of a financial crisis, then we're wasting the very thing that we do not have to waste, which is time. Every month, this country needs 1.5 billion US dollars just to survive. And right now, we do not know how many dollars we still have in the country. If we are to have elections, the elections will take at least 6 months. By the time they're organized, by the time people campaign, by the time they win the election, by the time the elections are cheated, etc., it would take at least 6 months. So that's what, between $6 to $9 billion that would have been wasted out of our inventory, and we don't even know if we have that money to waste, let alone that the very individuals who would be passing the electoral law that we would then be campaigning within are the very individuals that we are saying we no longer trust. So how can we envision that these same parliamentary members will pass an electoral law that will bring new people into office? It won't work. We're going to get the same groups of people, and they would simply have achieved a waste of time and a waste of money. What we are saying rather is, given the extreme delicacy of this situation, given the extreme danger of a bankruptcy for the country, what we are calling for is a transitional government with exceptional legislative powers. This transitional government, which would last approximately 18 months, would then maneuver the country out of this financial collapse. And towards the end of the 18 months, would devise an electoral law that would actually be representative of the people. And at the end of the 18 months, we would have elections. By then, the country would no longer be facing financial bankruptcy, but would be actually able to rebuild itself economically. We have a very clear plan on what we want to do in these 18 months. But to call for early elections now would be a waste of time, a waste of money, a waste of energy, and would not result in anything productive on the ground.
Can you share with us what your party would like to see in the next 18 months?
Yes. Well, I'm an elected representative of my party. The party in Arabic is called Mouwatinoun ومواطنات في Dawla, which translates loosely into English into citizens in a state. And what we are arguing is that once we have a government composed of statesmen and stateswomen who are equipped with knowledge, equipped with political responsibility and moral courage, and free, which means they are not beholden to any sect in Lebanon, nor beholden to any foreign interest. This government with legislative powers, which is not what a government typically has, because the legislative powers typically are within the parliament. But this government with legislative powers would then do a series of things. The first thing it would have to do is figure out how much money is left in the country, which we don't know. How much money is available to us, including what has happened to our gold. Most of the Lebanese gold, we understand, is in Kentucky, is in the United States. How much of that gold is still available to us now? How much can we use? We would also need, in the first few weeks, to send expert ambassadors to the countries far and near to us to renegotiate financial and economic transactions, because we need to renegotiate our financial relationships with the outside. And I'm talking about with all countries and with all institutions, of course, with the one exception, which is a country that we do not recognize, and we recognize it only to be our enemy, which is the Zionist state of Israel. So just to make that very clear. The second phase would be in the fair and equitable distribution of losses. We need to figure out how we're going to distribute our losses in the country, because we have less money than we need. Okay, so what does that mean? Whose burdens will we increase and whose burdens will we protect? We have to figure out how we can protect the vulnerable and the poor. We have to figure out how we can protect all health care for all residents in Lebanon and provide free education for all residents in Lebanon, while placing the burden on those who can carry the burden and on those who need to carry the burden because they have been responsible, and not placing the burden on those who can no longer carry it. And then the third phase is to re-establish the financial and economic relationships with our citizens, which is to re-examine debt, to re-examine social security, while again providing for our people. By the time we get to our fourth phase, we would finally be able to set the stage for building a state. This may come as a surprise to your listeners, but we do not have a state in Lebanon. We are a country that has been comprised of a quota system between sectarian leaders. This is not a state. We need to reinstate the census system. We haven't had a census in Lebanon since 1943. We basically have political leaders since 1943 that have built political policies based on ignorance, deliberately building policies based on ignorance. We need to figure out who is living in Lebanon, what their standards are, what their vulnerabilities are, so we can take care of each other. We need to reinstate one's physical residencies to one's political residency. Again, in the United States, you all are used to that the place where you live is the place where you vote. In Lebanon, that is not the case. Laws on civil status, so that our civil status is not determined by the 18 sectarian religious affiliations we have, but rather determined by the state. Those that want to be beholden to their sect can choose to, but at least there needs to be equality between all citizens, male and female in Lebanon. We can talk in much more detail about this plan, and I would encourage your listeners, if they want, they can check out our information on our website. We also have a very detailed article that was published today, November 19th, in Jarit al-Akhbar in Lebanon. But we have economic, political, social plans to build our country forward based on the reality of the situation, not based on fabrications, which was what our former Prime Minister Saad al-Hariri was basing his plans for the country on, and definitely not based on privatizing what remains of our country. The red line in the country is the safety and security of the society.
Thank you for that. So where do things stand now? And I mean, time is of the essence, as you've mentioned many times. So where do things stand, be it with convening parliament or getting rid of parliament or setting up these people who are going to come in and get the country back, standing on its. How do you see that happening?
Well, we've been protesting for more than a month, and I have to say that we have already achieved certain steps. They've been small, but they've been achievements. The Prime Minister did resign. The other man that was nominated to be Prime Minister, who's more corrupt than Saad al-Hariri and, more competent, but way more corrupt, who was Mohammed al-Safadi, lasted less than 24 hours before he also had to submit his withdrawal from nomination for Prime Minister. We were also able to close 2 parliamentary sessions in Lebanon, one that was closed today and one that was closed last week, because the members of parliament actually wanted to pass a deeply problematic so-called amnesty law, rather than deal with their primary responsibility, which is to form a new government. So we can talk about all these achievements that the people on the ground have done. Meanwhile, the government has simply proved itself to be incompetent. So we are struggling, both of us, for time. We are both of us putting pressure on each other. But thus far, in this game of chess, we the people seem to be winning.
Well, I hope so. I'm Lebanese, and I want to see Lebanon come back to its glory. Do you have any names that you would like to see in this transitional government?
You know, we're a small country in Lebanon, and everybody knows everybody. And for people to think that there's nobody else but Saad al-Hariri and Muhammad al-Safadi and Raya al-Hassan is an insult to the masses of Lebanese who are knowledgeable and expert and free and courageous. There are many names available in this country. The political sectarian leadership that remain incompetent and yet in power know who we are. They know how to reach us. So yes, there are men and women who are capable and who have the expertise and the courage to lead this country forward.
You know, and one other observation. We've seen the internal security forces and the army try to open roads, disperse some of the protesters, but so far, at least, things have been somewhat peaceful. And it seems like there is, and I might be wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, there seems to be some kingship between some of the ISF forces and the men and women that are on the streets. How are you seeing that?
I wouldn't go so far. I wouldn't go so far. These are the same forces that were very forceful against us in 2015 when we took to the streets to protest the corrupt so-called waste management system and the political leadership that allowed this country to be commodified back then. The reason the ISF and the Lebanese army have been relatively, and I emphasize relatively, peaceful with us is because there is no political decision for them to be otherwise. But let us also recognize that men have already died in this country in the past month. There have been a number of fatalities and numerous injuries and numerous arrests in this country. Thus far, the protests have been relatively peaceful, and the demand from the people has been very clear that we refuse absolutely to carry any weapon against the political leadership, because regardless how they may view themselves, we view them as brethren. We view them as citizens in the state, and we refuse to be using force against them. The force that we will use, though, is our pressure on the street and the clarity for political discourse.
Excellent. Is there anything else that you'd like to add, Rania?
Yes, I want to make one thing clear, because I understand that in the United States in particular, there's been a misrepresentation of these protests as if they were protests against Hezbollah and as if they were protests for us to normalize with the enemy. That is completely not the case. Completely not the case. When we are calling for the building of a civil state, we are calling for it and recognizing that we will always have the Zionist state as our enemy so long as it exists in its Zionist form. And therefore, this is not a protest to disarm Hezbollah of its weapons, but rather a protest that we can finally be building a civil state. And once we have this state that recognizes what it means to have an enemy at our door, and therefore recognizes that we need to build our army to its full capacity with whatever political and financial means we have available, only when we have a strong army will we then ask our Lebanese brothers and sisters who have amazing military experience to then come and join the army to empower our army forward. But I know that there have been those certain Lebanese in the United States that have been remarking and presenting these protests as if they are anti-Hezbollah or even sometimes pro-Israeli protests. That is completely not the case. The sovereignty of this country rests on two things: our economic capabilities and our political awareness of who our enemy is. And we refuse to differentiate or divide between the two or choose between the two. We want an economy that is just and fair and equitable and that is built on our self-production in Lebanon. We want a country that is civil and secular and just in Lebanon. And we will always be fighting for the liberation of our lands and fighting to protect Lebanon from the Zionist state. We will not choose one fight for another.
I'm glad you clarified that, because you're right. In the U.S., a big part of covering this has been that this is something that's against Hezbollah specifically and disarming them.
Yes.
Rania, thank you very, very much. Appreciate your
welcome.
time. I know your time is very valuable. I wish you the best. I wish Lebanon the best, and hope to see you again soon with us.
Thank you very much. All the best to you.
Thank you. That's our program for today. Thank you very much for joining us at the Arabic Hour. On behalf of all volunteers here at the Arabic Hour, this is Ayman Rajih, and I look forward to seeing you soon.